Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison's Select Reserve.
For all the challenges and the solution that can be applied to Africa, we unfortunately do not have the tradition and culture of democracy that you have experienced in Costa Rica or anywhere in the industrial world. How would you premise the promises of the future to Africa?
The issue that you mention is not something on which, the issue that you mentioned, which is the seeming inability of some democracies to move faster and realize and be able to deliver the aspirations of well-being of peoples, is not something that Africa has a monopoly on. I see that all over the world. So let me answer your question, if I may, in the following way. I think that if one were to bet on any political leadership coming out of Europe at this point in time, it would be a very, very risky bet. I don't see any political leadership really coming out of Europe. There is not one single European leader that is putting forward his ideas and his vision as to how the European project of nations living together, working together to improve their livelihoods can be furthered. Every single government in Europe today is taking care of its own little parcel, not thinking of the larger picture. And the economic crisis that we have been seeing in Europe is very much a consequence of the much greater and deeper political crisis, with leaders not being able to agree amongst themselves and signal which is the road forward. I see, very unfortunately, the same condition in the United States. Great president, President Obama. I think 80% of us around the world would have voted in those elections for President Obama. And I very often believe that the United States does not yet comprehend the greatness of a leader that they have in the White House. And you see his political opposition that would rather almost see the country come to an end in so many different ways than allow the government to move forward. We've just seen the way, for example, they made every possible effort up to the last minute to see if it made every possible effort against the government up to the last minute in terms of whether the U.S. was going to be able to raise its debt ceiling. And we were hours away from the U.S., the largest economy in the world, going into a situation where they could no longer pay their debts. A ridiculous situation created by irresponsible politicians. The opposition to President Obama is not a constructive opposition. And oppositions need to be constructive, and they need to say what they think about issues, mention a better alternative if they have one, but move forward at the end of the day. So there is a crisis of political leadership in the world, not only in some parts, as you have mentioned, in Africa. I also believe that Africa has a tremendous opportunity, as Latin America, my part of the world, to leap forward. We have seen ourselves leaping forward in development in many different areas. I'm here for the MTN conference. MTN is a technology company. We have seen Africa and Latin America leap forward in the use of cell phones, in the use of technology. We didn't have to go and bury copper in the ground as Europe and the US did so that every home could have a phone. We skipped that phase of burying copper and went directly to cellular telephony. That is exactly the same leapfrogging that we countries of the South can now do with respect to climate change. In transitioning to a low-carbon economy, we need to reinvent everything. The way we construct, the way we live, the way we work, the way we interact in society. We need to also reconsider our definitions. In that low-carbon economy, the U.S. is the most underdeveloped nation in the world. they emit 24 tons of carbon into the atmosphere per citizen per year. That is not sustainable. We, countries of the South, with much lower emissions, are much more developed in that new definition. And we should work together and work with developed nations as well that have additional technology they can transfer to us to make us much more efficient, so that at the end of the day, we can get out of this economic crisis by moving in the direction of a low-carbon economy, creating the jobs that we need for the young generations around the world and the opportunities for entrepreneurship and better quality of life.
There appears to be greater cooperation between governments, between social formations and the corporate world in the interest of a carbon-neutral economy. But how can we facilitate better foreign direct investment for these economies?
Financing development is not easy. This requires a lot of money, a lot of resources. And there are only really two ways in which countries can finance it. They can finance it with their own internal savings, or they can finance it with resources coming from abroad. The resources coming from abroad are of two types. Either bank loans, which you have to repay, not such a good business for a country, or direct foreign investment, which is money coming into the country to be invested in development, jobs, industry, creating opportunities that are going to produce goods that can be sold locally and can also be exported. In the case of Costa Rica, we are a very small country, only 4.5 million people, not a lot of savings there. So from very early on, we very clearly understood that our strategy to finance development was precisely attracting direct foreign investment. And we went about it with a passion. In 4 years of government, I made over 36 trips to attract direct foreign investment. We brought Intel into the country, which at that point in time in '96 was a $600 million investment in a small country, and by the way, the only Intel investment in all of Latin America. So it shows that even if you're small or you have disadvantages, if there is a will and there is a vision, you have pretty good chances of making that vision a reality. Around Intel, we attracted a number of companies, you've mentioned some, many others, to build a cluster of high tech. That cluster of high tech today is providing most of the jobs in Costa Rica and is a #1 dollar earner for our economy. The second cluster we put together was consolidating the cluster of ecotourism. And in this, your country and Africa has such a tremendous opportunity. Costa Rica has set aside 34% of its territory, even a small country, but 34%, in national parks, wildlife reserves, and biodiversity reserves. That 34% of the territory is the economic engine of ecotourism. We don't want to compete in the industry of tourism for the $359.99, 5 days, 4 nights, all included. That doesn't give any real value to the country from the tourists that come from abroad. We want to compete on the upper side of the industry. We want to compete where there's value added. And branding ourselves as ecotourism and being friendly to tourism has gone a long way in terms of building a second cluster of that activity, which today is the #2 dollar earner in the country. Now, countries have to choose where they have comparative or competitive advantages and put a program together to create clusters around these areas where they have comparative advantages and push forward on them, develop them, work on them. That, again, there is a great opportunity for governments to work with the private sector, with civil society, with the universities in the development of these competitiveness clusters that are going to give engines of economic growth and of job creation, which is what we need for the young generations today. I worry so much that the economic crisis that the world is going through, aside from all of its consequences, has as one of the major ones the rates of unemployment that we have. We need to create jobs.
It's been over 10 years since you were last a politician. Tell us about the next 10 years.
I have gone through life with the very clear intention of trying to reinvent myself about every 10 years. For the first 10 years, I was very much involved in the private sector as an engineer. And that's when I began to become very interested in the environment, because it made all the sense for the companies that I was working for to be able to save energy, to save resources, which contributed to the bottom line of profitability. After 10 years of private sector, I moved into 12 years of public service, when I was able to look at the coin from the other side and understand that governments have a very clear responsibility in setting up the legal frameworks through which the private sector and other national sectors can then understand what the rules of the game are and can move forward in helping the country to develop itself. So for the last 10 years after that, I have been working in Europe in international issues and business that deal exactly with these challenges. Today, I chair the Carbon War Room, which is a Richard Branson idea. Churchill, the British Prime Minister that led the British effort in the Second World War, came up with a concept that to win the war, he needed to organize a war room. Sir Richard Branson came up with a concept that to defeat climate change, we needed to organize a carbon war room. And in the carbon war room, we work with governments to identify policy failures that, if addressed correctly, can help us move towards a low carbon economy. And we work with industry to identify how, through either changing business models or looking at things from a different perspective, we can make it a good business opportunity to reduce carbon emissions. In that, Africa has a tremendous potential. And I hope that we can realize that potential.